So, have you ever actually wondered how your imagination can heal trauma? I mean, we usually just think of daydreaming as a fun way to pass the time, right? Or, fantasy is just some stuff we leave behind in childhood. But what if I told you that your mind's ability to conjure up alternate realities is actually one of the absolute most powerful, evidence-based healing tools we have? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really comprehensive, deeply fascinating historical review of psychotherapy. We're going to trace the incredible journey of imagination, literally how it evolved from these mystical ancient temple rituals all the way to the rigorous, hard science trauma therapies we rely on today. Okay, let's just dive right into it.
Here's a quick roadmap for our explainer today. First up, the power of imagination. Then, we'll go from ancient rituals to hypnosis. Third is young and active imagination. Fourth, the 20th century shift. And finally, modern evidence-based therapy.
Section 1. The power of imagination. Let's actually start by looking at why humans even have this wild capacity to dream up alternate realities in the first place.
I want you to really think about this fundamental evolutionary question. Our brains are incredibly energy-intensive organs, right? They literally don't do things just for fun. So evolutionarily speaking, if imagination didn't have a massive, crucial survival benefit, our brains simply wouldn't waste the precious energy doing it. So what's the payoff? Why did we evolve to mentally step outside of our immediate physical reality?
Well, the answer lies in a concept researchers call imaginal coping. Imagination isn't just about escaping reality, it's a really profound psychological function. It fosters empathy by letting us mentally step into someone else's shoes. It acts like a giant mental flight simulator, letting us test out different solutions to complex problems without any real-world risk. And maybe most importantly, it helps us process complex, overwhelming emotions safely. When things get extreme or terrifying, narrative, fantasy, and play give us emotional release. They help us reframe the meaning of what happened and actually build up our resilience.
Moving on to Section 2, Ancient Rituals to Hypnosis. Now, knowing that this is an evolutionary survival tool, it totally makes sense that our ancestors intuitively recognized its power. Let's trace this historical timeline a bit.
Long before modern psychology was even a thing, ancient civilizations were already utilizing this psychological tool. We're talking as far back as the 5th century BC, where Greek priests in the Asclepius temples were inducing specific healing visions and dreams in people who came looking for cures. Fast forward to the 12th century, and the great philosopher Maimonides was literally mapping the mind, specifically identifying this imaginative faculty as a core piece of human psychology. Then we take a massive chronological leap into the 19th century. This is where the medicalization of imagination really kicks off, through practices like mesmerism and early hypnosis, which were specifically used to target and neutralize trauma.
To see what this actually looked like in practice, consider this incredible story of a patient named Justine. She was treated by the pioneering French psychologist Pierre Janet back in 1890. Justine had been severely traumatized as a child by seeing the bodies of cholera victims, and she lived in absolute terror of this imagined cholera demon. Now, Janet didn't just sit there and tell her the demon wasn't real. Under hypnosis, he used guided imaginal dialogue. He straight up asked her, "Where is your cholera?" And she vividly replied, "Here, look at him, he is blue and smelly." By making the trauma vividly tangible in her imagination, Janet could then guide her through a script to successfully confront and completely neutralize that terrifying imagery.
Which brings us to Section 3, Young and Active Imagination. We are now perfectly entering the era of the early psychoanalysts. And man, this is where the clinical use of imagination hit a massive ideological crossroads. During this era, you basically had two absolute giants of psychology standing in stark contrast to each other. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, was incredibly skeptical of fantasy. He viewed imagination as an illusion, a failure to adapt to reality, and basically just a form of therapeutic resistance. Like if you were imagining things, you were actively avoiding the real work. But Carl Jung, he took the exact opposite approach. Jung fully embraced imagination. He saw it as this vital, transformative bridge connecting our conscious, everyday ego to the deep, vast, unconscious mind.
So, the crucial point here is how Jung basically weaponized this belief for healing. He developed a method called active imagination. And this wasn't just passive daydreaming, okay? It was an active technique where patients were guided to translate unconscious content into vivid images or even entirely separate internal figures. They engage directly with these internal figures. Jung famously did this himself. He would converse with his own imagined spirit guide named Philemon just to explore his own psyche. Pretty wild, right? And the results of engaging directly with these inner figures could be absolutely profound. Just look at this incredible outcome from Milton Klein's 1952 case study. He had a patient who was absolutely terrified of the dark because she constantly sensed this looming witch waiting for her. Well, through hypnoanalysis and imagination, she looked closely at the witch and, plot twist, realized the witch was actually herself. It was her own suppressed independence and desires that she had been way too afraid to express in her real life. By conversing with this figure, she integrated that lost part of herself. She ended up with this amazing realization. I suppose she is a thing of the past, since I am the witch and I like it. Talk about reclaiming your power through imagination, right?
All right, on to Section 4, the 20th century shift. As we transition into the mid-20th century, we see another huge evolution. Therapeutic imagination steps completely out of the quiet hypnosis chair and becomes highly interactive, physical, and even theatrical.
Pioneers like Fritz Perls made imagination incredibly dynamic through things like Gestalt therapy and psychodrama. You might have actually heard of the famous hot seat technique. Patients weren't just sitting there describing their feelings. They were actively role-playing characters from their dreams, or physically moving between chairs to act out a dialogue between conflicting parts of themselves. The whole focus was on making the imagined experience an immediate, deeply felt physical reality right there in the room.
Alongside this physicalization, other therapists were refining the inner landscape. Take the incredible waking dream exercises developed by Colette Abolker-Muscat. Her waking dream therapy involved guiding patients through these incredibly rich symbolic landscapes. For example, to process the grief of a painful breakup, a patient might be guided to imagine standing on a beach with their ex, saying a final goodbye, and then watching the ocean literally wash away the remnants of the relationship from the sand. It's just a beautiful, highly structured way to use visual metaphors to overcome very real mental obstacles.
And that brings us to Section 5, modern evidence-based therapy. So we've seen ancient temples, we've seen inner witches, we've seen the hot seat. But today, the magic of ancient imagination is validated as a rigorously tested, evidence-based psychological protocol.
Let's actually look at how this builds in the world of high performance through the pedal-up model, which is used extensively by elite athletes. They don't just, imagine winning. They systematically rehearse every single letter of that acronym. The physical sensations, the environment details, the task breakdowns, the timing, the learning process, and the exact emotional experience of the event. By structuring imagination this scientifically, they are literally pre-firing the neural pathways of success before their cleats even touch the field.
And that exact same principle of structured, deliberate imagination is literally saving lives in modern trauma therapy. Look at Edna Foa's prolonged exposure therapy for PTSD. It relies on gradual, safe, imaginal access to the traumatic memory, which allows the patient to essentially rewire their brain's response to it. EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, combines this imaginal processing with bilateral stimulation. Meanwhile, schema therapy actively uses imagination to literally re-script early childhood memories, having the adult self step into the imagined past to protect the child self.
Professor Mouli Lahad brilliantly conceptualizes exactly why this works with his idea of fantastic reality. Look, when reality is unendurable, like during severe trauma or a massive crisis, our minds create a psychological safe space, a fantastic reality where the logical rules of the real world simply no longer apply. This isn't a delusion, guys. It's a highly adaptive, creative survival mechanism that allows the psyche to continue functioning and eventually find a path to healing.
And Lahad applied this directly into the SE-FAR-CBT protocol. Patients use therapeutic cards to build the narrative of their trauma. They observe it at a distance, kind of like a viewer in a movie theater. Then, and this is crucial, they use their imagination to act as an editor. They literally take control to edit distressing images right out of their own traumatic memories, integrating calming, alternative realities instead. They take the raw power of the imagination that was terrorizing them, and they harness it to write a brand new, empowering ending.
And that brings us to our final thought for today. We've traced this brilliant arc from ancient Greek priests to modern clinical trials, but the core truth remains exactly the same. If our minds possess the staggering power to vividly simulate our absolute worst fears, to make our heart race and our palms sweat over something that isn't even happening, what could you achieve if you consciously directed that exact same power toward your own healing? Your imagination isn't just a childhood playground, it's an evolutionary tool, and it is entirely yours to harness. Thank you so much for watching this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.